In 1984, Mary Cooper walked into a San Diego Baptist church expecting a day of sermon and prayer. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a man watching her, and she couldn't help but look back. When the service was finished, the man introduced himself as Robert William Fisher, a San Diego firefighter. Mary and Robert instantly hit it off and were married 3 years later. Mary thought she had found her dream man. Robert was caring, kind, considerate, and good with their children. But there was a dark side to Robert, one that would be exposed one breezy April afternoon. At 8:42 a.m., the Scottsdale, Arizona Emergency Services received a call from a panicked neighbor on North 74th Place. The caller explained that they'd been awoken by a large boom that shook the neighborhood. Pieces of debris and brick had been thrown into the air, catapulting to the houses below. In the background of the call, alarms blared and residents panicked. When emergency services arrived at the scene, they discovered 2200 North 74th Place ablaze. Residents quickly identified the home as belonging to Robert, Mary, and their 2 children. Thick smoke plumed from each window and crevice, and first responders were not hopeful of finding survivors. As they entered the ruins of what was once a happy family home, firefighters came upon a horrific scene. Clearly, this was no accident, and an explosion had ripped through the entire home. It took several hours for the fires to be quelled, and when the home was nothing more than fizzling ashes, the Scottsdale Police Department made a stomach-churning discovery. Mary and Robert's 2 children, Bobby and Brittany, lay in their beds motionless. The patriarch of the family, Robert, was nowhere to be found. All 3 victims had been attacked before the fire started, but who could be responsible for such a callous act? Forensic fire investigators were called to the scene, and they discovered the presence of an accelerant. The trail of liquid led from one bedroom to another before winding down the hall where a candle had once sat. Forensic investigators also determined that the home had been filled with gas from a disconnected furnace, serving 2 purposes. The first was to subdue the family and render them unconscious, and the second was to create a slow-burning fire. Once the candle was lit, it was only a matter of time before the gas, accelerant, and fire mixed, causing a catastrophe. Investigators were eager to track Robert down. Did he know his family had been wiped out in a terrible accident? Or was Robert the mastermind of the entire operation? Robert was last seen leaving his home in his 2000 silver Toyota 4Runner, and several appeals were made. Robert's family even made TV appeals pleading for his return, as they feared he might have also been targeted during the attack. As investigators began to dig into Robert's personal life, facts became more apparent. On the surface, Robert and Mary enjoyed an idyllic marriage, but not everything was as it seems. By 2001, Mary had grown tired of Robert's controlling and abusive behavior. His anger knew no limits, and he had his family on a very tight leash. In March and April of 2001, Mary told Robert she wanted a divorce, which tipped him over the edge. Robert had painted a picture of a perfect family to the outside world, and he couldn't stand to see it crumble right before his eyes. Mary and Robert regularly argued, with Robert mentioning how his parents' divorce had affected him as a child. Mary was undeterred and was ready to move forward with proceedings, and Robert knew he could not change her mind. So he was prepared to do the unthinkable. If Robert couldn't have his family, then nobody could. Investigators determined that on the evening of April 9th, Robert and Mary argued with Mary going to bed. While everyone in the house was asleep, Robert unhooked the furnace, poured gasoline throughout the house, and lit a candle in the middle of the hallway. He left early that morning, just as he would if he was going to work, knowing what was about to unfold. Hours later, the flames and gas collided and caused an eruption that shook the otherwise quiet neighborhood. The Scottsdale Police Department called in the help of the FBI when it became apparent that Robert Fisher was not an innocent bystander. Their efforts to locate Robert were futile, and they knew he was on the run. Before becoming a respiratory therapist, Robert had served in the U.S. Navy and as a firefighter, giving him extensive outdoor and survival knowledge. Some of Robert's clothes were missing from the house, and the evening before the fire, he had withdrawn $280. 10 days after Robert went on the run, the FBI finally got a break in the case. The 2000 Toyota 4Runner Robert was last seen driving was found in the Tonto National Forest. Investigators believed Robert had ditched the car and taken off into the forest on foot. Robert knew how to survive outdoors, and investigators knew they were locked in a race against time. One of Robert's weapons was missing from the home, and they had no way of knowing where he would strike next. Despite extensive and expansive searches, no sign of Robert Fisher has ever been found. When the FBI announced that Robert was wanted for taking the lives of his family, the public were sent into a state of shock. Robert's family found the news especially hard to swallow. For 22 years, Robert Fisher had been able to outsmart the FBI, but his luck may have been running out. Over 100,000 tips have been called in, but only a handful of them were deemed viable. People as far away as Canada and Guatemala have reported seeing Robert, but he slipped away before agents could get there. There's also the possibility that Robert took his own life shortly after the incident, but investigators believe he is still alive. Robert Fisher is hiding somewhere out there, likely in plain sight. It's only a matter of time before he makes a mistake. In June of 2002, Robert was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, but he was removed 20 years later in 2021. There's a $100,000 reward for information that leads to his capture. Robert Fisher is described as a white male with brown hair, blue eyes, 6'10" and 190 pounds. He has a gold crown on one of his upper teeth and has surgical scars on his lower back. He may also have a distinctive gait due to severe back injuries. He's currently considered to be armed and extremely dangerous, and anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Phoenix office at 602-279-5511. Number 4. 18-year-old Alejandro Castillo was your average 18-year-old boy. After graduating from high school, he picked up a job at the Shomar's restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina to help pay the bills. Instead of navigating through adulthood like his peers, Alejandro took a different path. A path that led him to be featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list at just 18 years old. Little information is available about Alejandro's early life, and according to the FBI, he was born in Arizona. He eventually made his way to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he and his family settled down. In 2016, Alejandro found a job at Shomar's restaurant, and he quickly adapted to his new environment and learned valuable life skills. During his early days of employment, Alejandro met Sandy Lee, who was just a few years older than him. Despite their age gap, the two got on well and quickly became boyfriend and girlfriend. Their newfound relationship was the talk of the restaurant, and the couple seemed happy. Young love flourished, but not all relationships are meant to last. The relationship ran its course, but the two remained friends while working together. But one thing bothered Sandy. She had loaned Alejandro money, and he failed to pay it back. By August of 2016, Alejandro had a new girlfriend, 19-year-old Amia Feaster, who worked at the restaurant. Tensions began to rise, and jealousy clouded the air. In early August, Sandy sent several text messages to Alejandro asking for her money back. Finally, on August 9th, Alejandro agreed to meet with Sandy at a local Quick Trip to repay the money that he owed her. Sandy was relieved. The matter was about to be resolved once and for all, and everyone could move on. But the meeting would quickly turn sour. On August 10th, Sandy failed to show up for her shift at work, which was incredibly out of character. Her family reported her missing to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, and an investigation was launched. The CMPD discovered texts between Sandy and Alejandro the night before. While digging through evidence, investigators came across something shocking. Alejandro had not repaid Sandy. The roles had reversed. On August 9th, Sandy withdrew $1,000 at a nearby ATM, leaving her penniless. The CMPD also encountered another problem. Alejandro and Amia, the two people Sandy was last seen with, were also missing. They were officially reported missing on August 11th. The initial investigation was clouded with questions. Were Alejandro and Amia involved, or had they too been victims? A wide-scale search of Charlotte was put together, with the FBI joining the investigation. On August 17, 2016, the body of 23-year-old Sandy Lee was discovered in the 11,800 block of Plaza Extension Road. She had a single shot to the head, and attempts had been made to conceal her body in a wooded area. Investigators believed robbery was the motive, and they knew precisely who they were looking for: 18-year-old Alejandro Castillo and 19-year-old Amia Feaster. Reports and sightings quickly trickled in. On August 15th, just 2 days before her body was found, Sandy's car was found abandoned at an Arizona bus station. In late August, the FBI and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department got their significant break in the case. On August 16th, CCTV footage showed Alejandro and Amia crossing the border into Mexico from Arizona. With Alejandro now in Mexico, the FBI's involvement and efforts escalated. The walls were slowly closing in on Alejandro and Amia, and on October 20th, 2016, Amia arrived at a police station in Aguas Calientes, Mexico. She handed herself over to the authorities, and the FBI was immediately contacted. Amia was interviewed at length, during which she revealed what happened that fateful August evening. Alejandro met with Sandy, threatening her and presenting a weapon. He forced her to withdraw $1,000 before attacking her. He then drove into the woods and dumped her body. Amia also revealed that the pair had been staying in Aguas Calientes with Alejandro's extended family. By the time the authorities reached the address, Alejandro had already fled. In October of 2017, Alejandro Castillo was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. CCTV footage of Alejandro crossing the border was broadcast across the US and Mexico to garner new leads. Reports and tips have trickled in, but so far, Alejandro has been able to outsmart authorities. Amia was extradited to the US and now faces several serious charges, including accessory after the fact. There's a $100,000 reward for information that leads to his arrest, with information and helplines being available in English and Spanish. Alejandro Castillo is considered armed and extremely dangerous, and he may use the alias Alejandro Rosales. He's described as Hispanic with black hair, brown eyes, 5'6" and 180 to 190 pounds. He's fluent in English and Spanish, and anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Charlotte office at 704-672-6100. Number 3. May 11th, 2012 was a cause for celebration for 26-year-old Estrella Carrera. Estrella and her boyfriend, 30-year-old Arnaldo Jimenez, had just tied the knot, but not everyone shared Estrella's jubilation, including the groom. What should have been a joyous and happy day was doomed at the start. The unthinkable would happen just hours after promising to take care of each other. Estrella's absence wasn't noticed until the day after, when her friends made a grisly discovery. The relationship between Estrella and Arnaldo had been anything but sweet. Estrella had a 2-year-old son from a previous relationship, which seemed to bother Arnaldo. Estrella's family repeatedly begged her to leave him, as he was known to be violent and abusive. When he wasn't physically harming her, he psychologically harmed her and was extremely controlling. No matter how bad things got, Estrella felt that she was unable to leave. The pair resided at 7858 Rutherford in Burbank, Illinois. Neighbors would often hear the couple arguing, with Arnaldo's temper flaring. Arnaldo was previously arrested for domestic violence in Illinois. Estrella was too terrified to file a report, and the abuse continued. In May of 2012, Arnaldo told Estrella that the two were getting married on May 12th. Estrella picked out a sparkly silver party dress and readied herself for the big day. But it would be a far cry from every little girl's dream princess wedding. Estrella and Arnaldo tied the knot in secret, as Arnaldo feared that Estrella's family would intervene and block the union. On the morning of May 11th, 2012, Estrella and Arnaldo tied the knot in a small ceremony at the Chicago City Hall. That evening, they called up their friends and family and invited them to dinner. During the feast, Arnaldo and Estrella announced that the two had just gotten married. Estrella's friends and family were now more worried than ever for her safety, and were upset that they hadn't been invited. Despite the secrecy, the party continued. After eating their meal, the group headed to a local nightclub. CCTV captured Estrella walking towards the group in the sparkly silver dress that she'd worn for her wedding. This would be one of the last confirmed sightings of Estrella. Arnaldo's anger knew no bounds. Despite having just gotten married, he still pulled the strings. At around 4 a.m., after hours of dancing and several rounds of drinks, Estrella and Arnaldo got into his Maserati and headed for their apartment. During the drive, the two argued, most likely fueled by Arnaldo's explosive anger. According to reports, Arnaldo lost control and attacked his wife less than 24 hours later with a blade. On May 12th, the shock and surprise of Estrella's union with Arnaldo was finally beginning to settle. Late that afternoon, Estrella's family began to panic. Nobody had heard from her, and she had not collected her son. Estrella was unreachable by phone, and her family feared the worst. By May 13th, the worry had turned to panic, and the Burbank Police Department were called to Estrella's 7858 Rutherford apartment. When officers entered the apartment, they were shocked. Estrella's lifeless body was found in the bath, swimming in a pool of red liquid. She was still wearing the sparkly silver dress she'd gotten married in just 72 hours earlier. The medical examiner determined that she'd sustained several blows to the body and had most likely been attacked in the car. Arnaldo then dragged her body into the apartment, leaving her in the bath. The first person investigators wanted to talk to was Arnaldo, but he was nowhere to be found. Like Estrella, Arnaldo had also failed to collect his child, fueling worries that the pair had been part of a targeted attack. That was until Arnaldo's sister came forward to authorities. In the hours after Arnaldo's disappearance, he called his sister weeping on the phone. He explained that he had just hurt Estrella fatally. He refused to tell his sister where he was and told another friend that he was leaving for Mexico. The FBI was called in to assist in the case, and on May 17, 2012, Arnaldo Jimenez was charged in his wife's case. FBI agents were able to track Arnaldo's phone and discovered that he had made several calls on May 13th in Houston, Texas. His phone data showed that he had traveled through Chicago, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Texas. The last ping placed Arnaldo in Hidalgo, Texas, close to the Mexican border. 37-year-old Arnaldo Jimenez became the 522nd person to be added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. In September of 2012, investigators made a significant break in the case when they discovered Arnaldo's black Maserati. Initially, it was believed Arnaldo had fled in his car. However, it was later found in his brother's house. Forensic investigators searched and analyzed the car and uncovered several red stains. These stains are believed to belong to Estrella. This new finding led investigators to their final conclusion that the altercation happened in the car, and Arnaldo carried Estrella into the apartment and then into the bath. Despite uncovering his car and arresting his brother in the process on unrelated charges, investigators are still no closer to finding Arnaldo. Phone data has led investigators to conclude that Arnaldo fled into Mexico in the hours and days after Estrella's life was taken, making their job much more difficult. Authorities in Mexico have also been searching for Arnaldo, but no sign of him has been found. The FBI believes he may be hiding in Durango, Mexico. There's currently a $100,000 reward for information, and anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Chicago field office at 312-421-6700. Number 2. In January of 2015, Bangladesh Bank received an innocuous-looking email from Rassel Alam. The email detailed how Rassel was looking for a position at the prestigious Bengali bank, and for ease, he had achieved his CV and cover letter. All the Bangladesh Bank needed to do now was download the CV and contact him. But there was a catch. The CV may have contained real qualifications and experience, but they didn't belong to Rassel. Over the next year, a bizarre chain of events would unfold, leading to one of the FBI's most bizarre investigations. One employee opened the CV and letter that January afternoon. After scanning the document, they put Rassel to the back of their mind and carried on with their day. For over a year, things at Bangladesh Bank continued as usual. Swift transactions were processed. Funds from the New York Fed flowed in and out, and no cybersecurity risks were raised. But that all changed on Saturday, February 6, 2016. That morning, employees filed into the bank and discovered the printer, which made a physical copy of every transaction, was broken. The printer is an important part of the banking system, and staff needed to get it online fast. Minutes later, the printer sprang back to life, and all of their fears washed away for a moment. Pages upon pages of transactions and messages spewed from the printer, and one of the messages was from the New York Fed. Staff immediately tried to call the New York Fed, but it was a Saturday in New York, and the banks were closed. The message said that hackers had tried to steal almost $1 billion from Bangladesh Bank, which would have left the bank penniless. An emergency was declared, and an investigation began. Hackers had tried to transfer $961 million into accounts in Manila, the Philippines, over the course of 35 transactions. Unfortunately for Bangladesh Bank, some of these transactions had been successful, whereas others were flagged. The timing of the attack was incredibly significant, and the FBI quickly joined the investigation. The FBI and other agencies discovered that hackers began transferring money on Thursday, February 4th. Weekends in Bangladesh run from Friday to Saturday, meaning the suspicious transactions would not have been discovered until Saturday or Sunday. Hackers also took advantage of time zones, as was seen with the printer malfunction. Nobody was available in New York as it was the weekend and the middle of the night. When the money hit the accounts in the Philippines, it remained undetected because it was the weekend. Not only was it the weekend, but it was Lunar New Year, meaning banks would be closed until the following Tuesday. Time zones and public holidays made it impossible for banks to communicate with each other in real time, allowing the hackers to drain accounts. Thankfully, hackers were not able to make off with the projected $961 million due to one very tiny flaw. One of the transactions made from the Philippines to Sri Lanka was going to the Shalaka Foundation, a real nonprofit organization that helps those in impoverished areas. A minuscule error caught the eye of a bank employee. The hackers had spelled it as Fundation instead of Foundation, and the transaction was halted. The hackers made off with $81 million, but the FBI were determined to track them down and bring them to justice. Their spoils of war were funneled through casinos, which ultimately led them one step closer to uncovering the masterminds behind the world's biggest bank heist. Following an in-depth investigation, the FBI named the Lazarus Group as those responsible for not just the Bangladesh bank heist, but also the WannaCry and Sony Pictures hack. This new revelation in the case stunned the world, and as days went on, more and more details about the infamous Lazarus Group came out. The Lazarus Group are known to be North Korean hackers under the direct orders of Kim Jong-un, the current leader of the DPRK. The Lazarus Group is responsible for not just making the world feel their wrath and power, but also tasked with generating money for the Kim regime. North Korea is often portrayed as a poor and underdeveloped nation compared to its sister South Korea. Hence, the news that one of the most potent bank hacking groups was based in North Korea changed the political landscape drastically. Months after the foiled Bangladesh bank heist, the FBI placed Park Jin-hyuk on the FBI's most wanted list. The cyber world was now on full alert, waiting for Park to make his presence known. A little over a year after the Bangladesh bank heist, the Lazarus Group would strike again. On May 12, 2017, computers across the US, UK, and Europe froze, reappearing with ransom messages. They had been infected by a potent virus called WannaCry. The impact of WannaCry in the UK was substantial. The UK's healthcare system, the NHS, was hit by the attack, with 34% of hospitals and doctors' surgeries not having access to medical data and records. The most profound effect of WannaCry was seen in A&E. Paramedics and attending doctors needed access to medical records and information, making it challenging to communicate with other departments and consultants in the hospital. Doctors were also without past medical history, forcing them to proceed cautiously with treatment. This attack cost the NHS millions in damages and delayed operations and treatments for millions of patients. The FBI knew that the Lazarus Group could and would strike again if left unchecked. They've already proven they're capable of taking down entire healthcare networks and vital government infrastructure, despite being a poor and young nation. According to the US Justice Department, the Lazarus Group is capable of electronic phishing attacks, malware attacks, exfiltration of data, theft of funds, ransomware extortion, and creating botnets. Park Jin-hyuk and the Lazarus Group are also responsible for one of the biggest and most reported hacks of all time, the Sony Pictures hack. In 2014, the Guardians of Peace, now known as Lazarus Group, leaked essential and private information from Sony employees and the company in retaliation for the film The Interview. This was the first time the world had seen the Lazarus Group flex its muscles, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. North Korea was a hot topic in 2014, with the film The Interview partly responsible for that. Several threats were made against American citizens and people worldwide should they choose to see the film in cinemas. The FBI had been watching Park Jin-hyuk closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. He has connections to China, and as it stands, there's no extradition treaty between North Korea, China, and the US. Park Jin-hyuk is described as an Asian male with black hair and brown eyes. He speaks Korean, English, and Mandarin, and may use the name Pak Jin-hak and Pak Kwang-jin. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Los Angeles field office at 310-477-6565. Number 1. Alvin Scott was a naturalized US citizen, originally hailing from Turkey. Born Ahmet Sesuvar, Alvin moved to the US as an adult, finally settling in Atlanta, Georgia. The US hadn't been Alvin's only stop though, and he and his Bulgarian-born wife, Lilia Ivanova, had traveled and lived in Turkey, Canada, Germany, and Bulgaria. On the surface, the two appeared to have a picture-perfect relationship, but things were very different behind the scenes. There's little information available about Alvin or Lilia's early lives. The pair married around 1991, and their relationship was perfect at first. The two traveled the world together, taking lavish holidays to far-flung destinations. Throughout the 1990s, Alvin and Lilia traveled and worked across Europe. Alvin was known for his exceptional language skills, and he quickly picked up Bulgarian from his wife. His language skills, charm, and charisma landed him a job at the Turkish embassy in Sofia, Bulgaria. Eventually, Lilia and Alvin settled down in Atlanta, Georgia. The pair were excited to settle into their new environment, but their newfound joy didn't last long. As the years passed, Lilia assessed her marriage to Alvin and made plans to leave. Alvin sensed something wasn't right and tried to keep his wife by his side, but his efforts were futile. In early 2001, Lilia announced she was filing for divorce, shattering Alvin's world. Alvin was not only devastated but furious. He loved his wife and he believed he should be the only one to have her. In May of 2001, divorce proceedings officially began, and Alvin was served with the dreaded papers. Lilia moved out of the marital home, and with the support of her friends and family, she could begin moving forward in her life. Seeing Lilia flourish without Alvin only made him more furious. He expected Lilia's life to worsen without him, but it was the opposite. This was a critical point for Alvin, who began taking drastic actions. In late May of 2001, he began stalking his estranged wife. His behavior and actions started small, but they escalated quickly. Lilia would find Alvin watching her at work or at home. Wherever she went, he followed behind. He appeared at every social event and every gathering, letting Lilia know that he always had access to her life. Lilia hoped the divorce proceedings would be swift, and she could put this chapter of her life behind her, but things would soon take a dark turn. Lilia, who was terrified of Alvin, began staying at her friend Eli Abisab's apartment. At first, this move seemed to work, and Lilia could finally sleep peacefully, knowing Alvin wasn't watching her. But again, this didn't last long. Alvin is incredibly intelligent and cunning and was able to find Lilia within days. Lilia's peace had been shattered once more, and now she wasn't the only one with a target on her back. Her friend Ellie was now also facing the wrath of Alvin. Lilia's friends and family confirmed to the FBI that Ellie and Lilia were just friends, but Alvin didn't see it that way. He believed Lilia was having an affair, and was livid that she was seeing someone new just months after their divorce had been filed. With each day that passed, Alvin's bizarre behavior escalated. Lilia and Ellie received countless phone calls and saw Alvin watching them through the window. It doesn't appear that these incidents were reported to the police, allowing Alvin's behavior to go unchecked. Things were slowly reaching a boiling point. Each day that passed without Lilia in his arms added more fuel to the fire. Then, on August 3rd, 2001, things finally reached a shocking crescendo. Lilia and Ellie awoke that morning, not knowing what was to come. At around 11:30 p.m., the two left Ellie's apartment where Lilia had been hiding from her estranged husband. As the two left the front door, a sense of unease washed over them. They were not alone. Alvin Scott had been waiting for them all afternoon and evening. Alvin discharged his firearm several times, and Lilia and Ellie clambered for the front door. Unfortunately, Alvin was just 2 steps behind and followed them into the apartment building. Alvin first set his sights on his estranged wife, Lilia, discharging his firearm several more times at close range. Lilia screamed, and then everything fell silent. According to reports, Ellie tried to run to the safety of his apartment, but it was futile. Alvin caught up to Lily, discharging his weapon 3 times. Residents of the apartment heard the commotion and waited until Alvin had left to help Lilia and Ellie. The Atlanta Police Department was called to the scene, but unfortunately, it was too late for the pair. Each had 3 fatal wounds. Lilia and Ellie's families were informed of their passings, and suspicion immediately turned to Alvin. Lilia's family told the Atlanta police about Alvin's threatening behavior in the lead up to the incident, and investigators began their search for him. After attacking his estranged wife and her friend, Alvin drove to Marietta, Georgia, and stayed with the friend. According to the friend, who the FBI later interviewed, he had no idea that Alvin had just attacked Lily or Ellie. He was said to have been calm and in good spirits. The following day, August 4th, 2001, Alvin borrowed a car from his friend and drove to the outskirts of Atlanta. The police and FBI were 3 steps behind Alvin, and by the time they tracked the car down, he had already abandoned it outside of Atlanta. According to America's Most Wanted, Alvin made his way from Georgia to Philadelphia, likely renting or even stealing cars along the way. There are unconfirmed reports that Alvin rented a car in Philadelphia, and after that, the trail went cold. Even the FBI has had a hard time tracking Alvin down, and it may still owe to his time in the Turkish military. According to reports, Alvin served in the Turkish military from 1972 to 1986, and was part of the investigative branch. He also worked at the Turkish embassy in Bulgaria, and has a vast knowledge of multiple languages. While Alvin has a US passport, the FBI believes he likely has numerous fake passports and may even hold a fake Turkish passport. There were even rumors that Alvin had worked as a spy for the Turkish military during his service. It's believed Alvin fled the US shortly after Lilia lost her life, and he's likely in his native Turkey. Witnesses have placed him in New York and Jamaica, but these sightings have never been confirmed. The FBI has labeled Alvin as cunning and extremely intelligent. He was placed on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list shortly after he fled. He has multiple fake passports, aliases, and a never-ending supply of fake backstories. One Turkish article noted that he's disguised as a disguise, and he's defined as 1,001 faces by the FBI. Alvin Scott is described as a white male with gray hair, brown eyes, 6 foot and 170 pounds. He may be using a fake name and passport and uses the date of birth September 1st, 1950 and September 21st, 1950. There's currently a $20,000 reward for information that leads to his capture. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Atlanta field office at 770-216-3000. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.